To start this section, we would want to speak about cloud infrastructure, edge and core networks with Mr. Johnson Aguba. Oh, he's the CEO for Classic Data Centers, and he has something interesting to speak to us today about cloud infrastructure, edge, and core networks.
Thank you so much, Joshua. A name so good, he took it twice. Where's Duale? Duale, thank you, and all the organizing members of NGPIF, and all the members of NGNOG. You're really doing community's work. And I really want to applaud you. I want to laud you. You've done a lot, but the road ahead requires heavy lifting, and I think we're all ready and able to push that boulder uphill. So, thank you. So I was supposed to keynote, and while driving over with Dean, I decided to change it into a conversation and bring a friend with me. And let's have a conversation about infrastructure in general, digital cloud infrastructure specifically. And I hope you don't mind. I think I don't want to bore you to death with slide decks and numbers. I think let's have a conversation overall. So I'll open up with a few remarks and then turn it over to a conversation with my dear friend Dean. So for those of you that do not know me, I've been around a while. I'll try not to date myself too much, but in the early days of the internet, we really believed in creating and scaling the internet that worked for all, for everyone. Not just when you dial in, when the enterprises use it. So we built the backbone to work for all. That meant that the peering points, the interconnection points must work. So the maze in the early days and the NAPs in the early days must work. So being part of UUNet, we contributed our fair share of traffic to the internet in the early to mid 1990s. And all of our peers at that time believed likewise. And we all met at the maze and the NAPs and we all peered. And we worked with each other to make sure that peering actually happened well. We had a thing called the ISP Geeks List. So it wasn't just the operator community, the ISPs. It was Cisco and other developers that were in the midst of it. So we couldn't troubleshoot real time. When a mail melts down, we fix it. And that knowledge stayed with a small community of people. And that good intent actually became a problem because all of the big peers, Sprint Internet, MCI Internet in those days, ANS and so on and so forth, of course UUNet, melted the NAPs and the maze. So we did something about it. The first meeting was with UUNet and Internet MCI in 1996. So Vinton Cerf, Jack Waters, Tony Bates, met up with Mike Odell, Mink Manus, myself, Joe Malcolm, in a room. And we drew the map of the US. And we said we have to offload the maze and the NAPs. And we started private peering. You take two DS3s, this location, we'll take two DS3s, that location. And our job was to offload the maze and the NAPs. I think that was probably the first direct connect for those that are tracking the cloud connectivity these days. And, that's a tidbit of scaling. Our networks must perform at scale. So fast forward to today, cloud infrastructure is the biggest source and sink of all traffic, period. And in sub-Saharan Africa, there's only one cloud region, that's South Africa. But I think it's coming to Nigeria for all intents and purposes, because the latencies between Nigeria or most of Sub-Sahara to the nearest cloud region is greater than 60 milliseconds, at best 50 milliseconds. And most of you that, the global enterprises that we often refer to as super and hyperscalers are here. So you guys pay attention to those things. So, and that's why Equiano is coming. That's why 2Africa is coming. That's why the cable systems that are already here, from WAX to ACE to GLO to Main 1 are upgrading capacity, in readiness for public cloud to arrive. So if you think of interconnection, if you think of peering, it's about to change. And if you think of Lagos readiness, it's about all of us. So I will start with that backdrop for us. Nigeria has its challenges, big challenges, right? But we're up to it. And I'll rattle off a few of them. Yes, the digital infrastructure, has come a long way. We've leapfrogged to mobile first, and we've grown tremendously. All thanks to the mobile operators in this room, all the national fiber providers, all the metro providers, all the interconnect providers that are in this room. You've done a wonderful job. But it's not enough. We need to drive broadband across all of Nigeria. We cannot be at 44% penetration while our peers are well over 80%, some over 100%. So that's part of those readiness, and you're fairly aware of those. The other is just supply of broadband, of co-location facilities, right? Proper co-location facilities. Nigeria is lagging as well. South Africa is over 200 megawatts because you calibrate co-location not in floor space but in the power, critical power delivered for the compute, storage, and networking units. So South Africa is way up there. Nigeria is probably, at about 30 megawatts. So there's a huge disconnect. That's why all of us are here, to build that capacity. And I want to give a shout out to the likes of Equinex that have entered, the likes of Digital Realty Interaction that have entered. ADC is here, OADC is here, Rack Center has been here for a very long time doing work. And of course, CASI is here, 21st century, and so on and so forth. So I'm fairly confident that supply will soon be available. But to get it to really ramp to where we believe it will be, we need to partner with federal government. We need to partner with governments, both state governments and federal governments, to get it there. We need to really drive and take lessons from various cloud regions. And my favorite is Ashburn. I believe my colleague's favorite, Dean's favorite, is Arizona and Salt Lake City. He'll talk about it, please. And, Ashburn grew deliberately, post UUNet and AOL deployments there at the beginning of Equinex deployment there. They were deliberate. And I think that level of partnership with governments, because they do have a great role to play, will go a long way. I think an incentive model that lifts all must be there. creating a special economic zone for cloud infrastructure must be in place. It not only incents the builders of the digital cloud infrastructure, it also incents the users of such infrastructure that deploy at scale. Think about it. If you really build megawatts of colocation, right? And you partner with the government to accelerate permits and the rest of the business environment, and you still need the hyperscalers to occupy it, and you want them to favor here. You want them to favor Nigeria sooner than later. And if they are going to deploy megawatts of racks and, blinking lights, those things cost a lot of money to show up. We need to give them incentive. From customs to landing it, to bolting it down, to activating it. Because one thing they know how to do is go fast. So, I will mention it, and Lagos State is already at work on this. And I'm excited about it. So, let me quickly end this remark and start the conversation. I don't know if you have any of the bios up here. It's not. So, my dear friend Dean and I happen to be on a trip, a conference in Colorado. And we both chose to hike. You can run, you can, bike in Boulder, Colorado. We chose to climb the Flatiron. And for those of you that follow Dean, you must have seen some pictures. That's a 4-hour hike. I think it was more than 4 hours. So we went up and we came down. On the way up, we sort of went back in time and compared notes. And we talked about Africa and Dean's passion, both personally, professionally. And we actually said it would be good to be here. And I will have him talk about it. And in Dean's fashion, on the way down, that's the leeway side. I think he was taking it easy on me, going up the hills. So on the way down, he pinned me down to a date. When? And knowing that NGPIF is happening this week, I suggested being here this week, and he said yes. He's having events the previous week. He has an event in Europe, but he will favor being in Africa, being in Lagos this week. So I felt it's really great to have him up here, to have a conversation with us. I think that's much better. So, Dean is an extraordinary human being. In the last 30 years, I cannot think of an individual that have impacted infrastructure at scale as Dean. And for some of you that date back to 20 years plus, you remember Sun Microsystems. And you remember the impact Sun had in moving forward the digital platform. He was part of that innovation. He drove a significant portion of that. And then, who here have not heard of eBay? Anyone? Well, I actually consider eBay the first real cloud. And the infrastructure was his baby. And he thought at an amazing scale. He thought at an entirely deployment model. I know when I was building PyCoral, web scale flash storage, we're talking to his organization. And they told us, if you cannot rack and stack on a 48U, right? And containerize it and just have it move from our dock to Arizona, don't even think about it. So there's nobody that thought about scale and the impact of infrastructure at scale as Dean. So that's a fraction of the innovation on eBay. And as far back as eBay, he started measuring impact of his infrastructure. Of course, eBay took over PayPal and the load probably doubled. And he kept up with that scale. And then he moved on to Uber, and all of you use Uber day in, day out. And in Uber, the vectors of scale changed. Complexity of innovation probably went exponential, and he responded effectively and delivered. So, and he wasn't done. Along the way, he's always been mission-driven. And he thought about how do you really grow and change the way we think about infrastructure at scale. And he came up with Infrastructure Masons, an organization that if you're not part of it, you should register. You should become part of the over 100,000 members. Infrastructure Mason is London impact, and it's people like you being a part of it to change the world. And Dean, I want to thank you for your drive, for being socially conscious and minded, and for really driving all of us to be the best of ourselves. Welcome to Lagos. Welcome to NGPIF. I hope you will come more often.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here. So, to bottom line everything, I just love infrastructure. Digital infrastructure runs the world. So, and by the way, this is my first time in Africa ever. So it was great to come back here and land into Lagos. So. And everybody's been so accommodating. It's been amazing, this trip, just meeting so many people. And I'm extremely excited about what is actually happening here. And there's a reason for that. It's both in the community side and then it's in the industry side. So as Johnson was mentioning, I'm very much about the community. I started Infrastructure Masons back in 2016 in between eBay and Uber because I wanted to get my friends back together and start thinking about what we could do as an industry, because there really wasn't a consortium that made up all digital infrastructure, right? We have things like, of course, this industry when it comes down to the connectivity, right, aspect. We have the compute industry, we have the data center industry, we have the software industry. You think about all those different disparate parts. So how do we bring those people together? And so establishing Infrastructure Masons was important, and for me, because when we bring community together, we can actually change things. We can move things forward. And so that's what we're actually doing here as well, is we're launching the Infrastructure Masons local chapter focused on Nigeria, specifically to say, how do we take this community and really focus in on 4 primary things? First one is education. Can we go back and educate the local talent to actually bring them into our industry? Secondly is diversity and inclusion. How do we bring more people into the industry? Because right now we have less than 10% females in our industry. There's a huge pool of talent that we need to tap. Third is around sustainability. So we've created a thing called the iMasons Climate Accord, specifically focused on reduction of carbon and digital infrastructure globally. And we have 170 companies associated with that, including AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Cisco, Schneider Electric, Digital, 65 co-location companies, 13 product companies. Like, it's incredible as we start bringing people together, all focused on a simple mission. And then the fourth one is technology. How do we leverage the technology to really move our other strategic initiatives along? So the community aspect is really important for me. And then when you think about the just the digital infrastructure industry itself, we are at, I think, an inflection point specifically here in Africa. And the reason for that is, sorry, let me back up for a second. One of the things we do in Infrastructure Masons is a scholarship program. I forgot about this. 45% of our scholarships have been awarded to people in Africa just this year. That, to me, is such an indicator. There's hunger There's people that want to get into the industry. They want to be able to take advantage of the things as they start to see technology and the digital infrastructure industry making a difference out there. We need to expand that when it comes down to awareness. Do people understand what this industry is about? Do they understand the careers, the opportunities? Because the tide truly lifts all boats when we start landing infrastructure. So back to that inflection point for me is that, I'll give you a comparison. I went to India in 2019, actually 2020, right at the beginning, before the pandemic, and found out that there was a total of 400 megawatts across the entire country. 400 megawatts of capacity for 1.3 billion people. And if you just put that in perspective, almost 350 megawatts is being built just in Phoenix, Arizona. So the amount of capacity serving that country. Well, now when we look at Africa, and I think you shared the numbers with me yesterday, there's 300 megawatts across all of Africa. And you're getting towards 1.4 billion people, I think. This is exactly where things were in other parts of the world when that swing started happening. There's 2 billion plus people that are still not on the internet. And this is the age of machine to machine. We're going to have 8 billion people that are actually consuming on the internet. We're going to have 135 billion things consuming on the internet. Behind that 135 billion things, there will be more than 1 trillion sensors. All of it generating data, all of it communicating, all of it going over the networks that we have and going into the data centers and consuming that compute, that storage, right, that machine learning. It's just a massive data tsunami coming. And we've seen it. We thought it was big. We thought it wouldn't be any bigger. It just continues to grow. But it all comes down to, from my perspective, what's happening in emerging markets. 3 of them specifically, India, LATAM, and Africa. It is where we have not really gone to scale. And that's the key that we keep talking about here is the way this works is when you go to scale. But to go to scale, there are certain things that have to be in place to make sure that you can. It's like anything, you optimize and then you can start to truly ramp that back up. But what I'm excited about in Nigeria is specifically from the community aspect, there's a huge pool of talent here. There are people looking for careers, looking for opportunities, and we should be able to develop that. Secondly, there is a massive amount of demand that's going to be coming up. And as you said, just in this region alone, between the 4 different data center providers, right, the different network carriers and things, there's the wave that's going to hit. And are you ready for it? And are you prepared for the structure to be able to scale? That means attracting the hyperscalers. We'll launch all of it. As soon as you land one, the rest come. And as soon as cloud is here, all the other businesses start latching. And when those start latching, the data growth starts growing exponentially. That is really what we need to focus on. How do we make sure that Nigeria and all of Africa can not just kind of incrementally grow, but can leapfrog because it needs to. It's one of the biggest markets in the world.
Thank you, Dean, for that introduction. A lot of nuggets to pull out, but let's talk a little bit. You've been a phenomenal individual, and you've had a lot of mission bent. I actually want to ask a couple of questions. The first one is on the personal side. You and your family have been on a mission to build scale, and India is one of those examples. Can you share with us here in the audience on what you're doing there?
Sure. Again, I'm mission driven. I really like community. And my mom and I went to India on the trip back in 2006. And we saw a need. And the need was really around education. And fast forward to today, we started an organization called Just Let Me Learn. And she said, I want to build a school in India, because that's my mom. And we ended up creating the school, and then we created another campus. And of course, we designed it like we designed data centers. How do you do, region planning, make sure you got enough understanding of what's there so you can scale things back up. So we built schools to be able to accommodate all of the population and then some. And even with that one, it's scaled past. So we've got 2 campuses and over 1,000 kids enrolled in the schools right now. And what was really neat for me is in 2019, we went back and it came full circle. We started awarding scholarships from iMasons back to local folks within the area to come back into digital infrastructure. And so, that it all just kind of blends together here in how that works. So from the personal side, it's all about making an impact. I started as a technician at Sun Microsystems on the manufacturing line. That I had no idea what Silicon Valley was, what Unix was. I had no clue. So I came out of Arizona. They hired half my graduating class. We came in and we started learning about it. And I went through the University of Sun. And being all the way from the ground floor and understanding what these things were, especially because I started in 1989. So I'm dating you here. 33 years in the infrastructure industry. It's crazy. It goes fast. But just being able to now go back and say, how can we grow this at scale? It's been great.
I ask that question just to say, each and every one of us can learn significant impact just by a single act of trying to build capacity here in Nigeria, here in Lagos, across all the population centers of Nigeria. And I admire what Dean has done, and that is a generational impact by a single act. So if we want to build tech infrastructure, let's teach, and I actually want to draw an example here. When I came around in 2016, I call him Professor Mohammed Rodman and I met up. And he started by giving me the history of the internet, and we bonded. And it became apparent to me that he's a teacher. And I've met some of the people that he's actually impacted over time. These are things that will pay forward. And these are the capacity that we sorely miss, that we will need to build cloud here. So Dean, let me turn around to your more public, one of your more public missions, which is iMason. I was privileged to be with you on Wednesday when you were handing out awards, and I saw firsthand the impact, the people impact. Can you talk to us about building human capacity in our industry?
So when you think of Infrastructure Masons as a professional association, and just to be clear, we leave our companies at the door. And we do that on purpose because it is literally about the people that actually make this happen. So, because continuity, think about when you change jobs and things. Being part of a community that doesn't care where you're working right now, they care about you. And it's really focused on the things that aren't solved with other forums. Again, education, diversity, inclusion, sustainability, and then technology. How do we bring people together to truly go back and make a difference in those? So what we've done, of course, within our scholarship programs and that type of thing is all about getting more talent in the industry, because all of us have a challenge right now, which is how do we find the talent, develop the talent, and retain the talent, especially in emerging markets, because look, the hyperscalers and all the other players that are coming back in here are going to expect this. They're going to have local talent that's going to be able to now scale, again, everything that's going on. So the development programs for it, what we're trying to do at iMasons is say, can we grease the skids? Can we really get the pipeline going? Because right now, I'm nervous, we just don't have enough people. And this is what I'm hearing from all of the different foundation partners and folks within iMasons too. They're all trying to find people. They're all feeling the growth strains on everything, whether it's supply chain and then to the human capital aspects to say, how do you grow in Nigeria? What happens when you start adding zeros on the ends of the numbers? You need quite a bit of people power, right? Brain power and expertise to go back and make that happen. And secondly, I think what's important is you've got a lot of corporations that are, headquartered in the US and in Europe, right, and other parts of Asia. And in the end, how do you make the local markets work? No matter what, at least from my experience, it has to be local talent. There has to be local leadership. There has to be a local understanding. Without that, you're trying to force your thinking of other cultures and other things onto another culture. So while we've got certain elements that are very common, right? Structure, standardization, scale, right? Being able to grow past and forecast what you're trying to do, that always is there. But when it comes down to how do you build in Lagos? How do you connect in Lagos? How do you recruit in Lagos? You must have the folks here that actually know and understand that, or else you won't be able to scale again without it. So the human capital aspect, I think, is probably one of the largest threats for us when it comes down to being able to serve the demand that's happening within these emerging markets.
Thank you so much. I would like to come back to this towards the end of our chat. Let me pivot to the professional side. You are the CEO of Keto Digital. You practice what you preach. You walk the talk, right? One of the pillars of iMasons is sustainability, if I may use that word. What are you doing there? How are you contributing?
Okay, so let me just first give a little bit around the Climate Accord and why I think it is so significant. Back in February, there's a guy named Christian Bellotti. If you don't know who he is, he's at Microsoft. He's been in the industry for a very long time. He's the guy that created PUE, Power Usage Effectiveness, the metric. He drove that when he was at HPE, right, and developed everything across this when it came to Microsoft. He is extremely purpose-driven, as is, I'd say, the majority of everybody on our advisory council. And we realized that climate change, what's going on globally, you can see it. We're not moving fast enough to do things about it. And it was frustrating all of us. And so we said, why don't we get together as an industry group, industry body? So I called Christian and I said, hey, we want to come to your house. I want to bring 40 people over. Those are kind of weird phone calls to receive, but 40 executives, and we're going to hold our advisory council session at his house. And we have one objective. That's to bring everyone together and find a single thing that we can do as an industry to battle climate change. One thing. Sounds easy? Easy is complex. 6.5 hours later, working within there, the Climate Accord was born. And the reason that's important is we suddenly unified all these companies on carbon reduction as the first step towards net zero. And it's very difficult when you start looking at how do I go back and make sure that everything I use isn't impacting the environment itself. And for us, we're very physical. It is the materials, it's the products, it's the power that actually enable all this to happen. So we said we're going to go after carbon reduction together, and we're going to start to drive these things called carbon labels. Just like nutrition labels on food, we actually are saying what's the embodied carbon inside of the materials that build the building, the concrete, the steel, the copper, right, the fiber, etc. And then what is the embodied carbon on the products? Everything from the air conditioning to the generators to the servers to the switches. And then what is the carbon intensity of the source energy that's serving that data center itself? And let me put this in perspective. Right now, we've done the research and found that there are 7 million data centers. Okay? This is everything from the box on the street corner that's serving the control systems to the gigawatt campuses. 7 million locations that all have a unique address. It's important for a reason. Those 7 million represent 105 gigawatts of capacity globally that's serving digital infrastructure. Okay? We consume 594 terawatt hours of energy every year. To put that in perspective, that represents 2.4% of the global energy draw is to serve the back-end digital infrastructure for all the people and the machines on the planet. Okay? That number's continuing to go back up. 2.4%. When you start to think about what it means from a climate standpoint, how we're actually addressing these sustainability aspects is important, especially as we grow. So my point with this is that we came together, we launched in Monaco in April. We had 74 companies signed up, And leading the charge was AWS, Google, Meta, Microsoft. 6 weeks later, we had 170 companies signed up. If you look at the market cap, the combined market cap of the companies involved in the climate accord, it is $6 trillion. Just mind-blowing, the amount of buying power across these companies. So we're all focusing in on how we can reduce carbon. That is going to be, what are the carbon labels? What's the embodied carbon for this product? I'm going to make buying decisions on it. So the number one thing, the most difficult thing to solve is Scope 3 emissions inside of infrastructure. Scope 3 means it's everybody else's problem. It's the supply chain, how the minerals are mined, how the steel is smelted, everything that happens all the way up to the point where you have a product. Scope 3 is where everybody's having a challenge. So to answer your question, Cato Digital is a software company that is using software to unlock stranded capacity in data centers. We're basically enabling oversubscription safely by aligning SLAs that match what happens in cloud. But we've taken this one step further, and we're actually deploying carbon-free compute. And the key for this is we're taking second life equipment for general purpose compute. We're deploying that back into data centers and using all of the waste in the data centers. Because that 105 gigawatts of capacity, a minimum of 37 gigawatts is never used. Ever. All this capacity built, all this investment made, which represents over $227 billion worth of capital that's been in there that's not yielding the return it could, massive amounts of it. So from a sustainability standpoint, can we take second life equipment, which has zero embodied carbon in it, land it into the wasted capacity in a data center, which has zero embodied carbon associated with it, and then power it with clean energy? So Cato Metal is rolling back out, and ironically, we are launching here in Nigeria and Silicon Valley, Ashburn, and other places. So the point is, can we get general purpose compute that is both cost effective and sustainable day one?
So let's pull it all together. You know, our industry is one of scale. The problem we have is not technology, it's technology at scale. As we say in UUNet days, any other problem derives from that. And I'm privileged to have Dean on the stage because he's truly been a master of scale. And he's giving you insight into what truly matters, the real tough problems at global scale. So as cloud moves into Nigeria, do we copy and paste what's been done elsewhere and hope to evolve, or do we leapfrog and become partners with the big users of cloud, both hyperscalers, superscalers, and the enterprises? I think we choose the latter. Let's be accretive to their climate targets. And so that's the first call to all my colleagues in the room. The second one that's really important, and tying it and bringing it back to NG Nog, is what I said earlier. Your biggest sources and sinks will be the cloud, the digital cloud infrastructure, period. The cloud infrastructure is a tsunami. It's not just a tide coming, it's a tsunami coming. It will lift all boats, as Dean said. And the nexus will be our interconnection fabric. How do we scale IXPN and the likes nationwide? How do we get the bits from the cloud to the edge, to the handsets, to the homes? Because whether you believe it or not, Nigeria has gone digital. Our lifestyle is now digital. Why do I assert? I go into the village to see my aunts and my uncles. They are not just on WhatsApp. They are worshiping on Zoom. Now, what's more digital than that? You know, we used to call ourselves plumbers, and we are truly the internet plumbers. How do we plumb to the edge from the core? I think that's the job of NG-NOG. Scale is coming. Our interconnection points will be congested by it. We need to begin to think ahead. The old construct of peering will be broken here in Nigeria. So how do we leapfrog? That's truly the challenge. Technology at scale. And then bringing it around to what makes it happen. Human capacity at scale. You know, I was asked a question. Why did you start a company and start a teaching academy? You're running 2 businesses. I said, no, I'm running 1 business. Because I need the human capital to build a business. So I know I cannot recruit enough. And even if I recruit, 18 months later, they're off elsewhere. So, and that's part of the reason I actually asked him to be here, because, hey, I trust that you will teach, you will pay it forward. You have no option. We started NANOG for that reason. Lift all boats, pass on the operational experiences, have a hotline such that when your network is in trouble, there are some of us that can actually jump in and help you plumb it, because the internet works as one. So you have no choice but to teach it forward. Question is, how do you scale it? How do you partner to scale it? Because we cannot do it alone. How do we learn lessons to pass it along? How do we tie in our big brothers and sisters like the hyperscalers and bring their tool sets? How do we reach out to an organization like iMason, bring them to Nigeria, and then deploy their tool sets? They have scholarships, so in Nigeria we fight for those things. How can we make sure enough of it is directed here? So, as opposed to talking about peering at the edge, cloud at the edge, content at the edge, I really wanted to talk about scale today. And we need to think bigger. We need a bigger boat, guys. Cloud is coming to Nigeria. So how do we catch that wave and surf it safely, reliably, to the benefit of all? Especially those young kids in the village that wake up hungry to school and thirst to learn. How do we get connectivity and plumb it effectively to every school, not just the tertiary schools, but down to primary schools, where the brains, the neurons are still, forming, firing. So, to summarize, it takes all of us, and it starts with a simple individual. Nobody exemplifies it better than this gentleman next to me. From personal to professional to public missions. Thank you so much, Dean. Any closing words for us?
Yes. Okay. So if you have people that are interested in getting in the industry, go to imasons.org/scholarships. Let me put it to you this way. We have more money than applications. That's a problem. We need to flip this back around. Okay? Also, I would love everybody here to join iMasons. It is really about the community. So imasons.org/join. It's the community that really makes the difference. And again, I appreciate you having me here. I appreciate you welcoming me with open arms. This has been a great experience. Thank you.
It's a conversation. We've been talking to each other and to the audience. The audience should talk back.
Thank you very much. This is very exciting. And my name is Mary Uduma, and it's very. I'm so excited to be here to hear these positive things that are coming, and we are looking forward to it arriving in Nigeria. One of the questions I want, or clarification, or perspective I want you to also speak to us about is, we are interested in a digital asset, and we know cloud with the data, the gathering of the big data, and how do we have data sovereignty. And I like the fact that you look at education. You said education, and you talked about sustainability as well as development. Diversity. And diversity for us is very, very key in our country. I'm part of a community. I do community work, and I do it on volunteer basis. And so when we do this data gathering, how do we protect our asset, digital asset? How do we protect our digital sovereignty? Thank you.
Yeah, so let me start with that. And by the way, thank you very much for sharing that, and thank you for being in the industry. So I think right now the majority of data that is generated or consumed for Nigeria and all of Africa is outside of the country, and that's a problem. So whether it's data sovereignty or performance or opportunities, the data needs to be in country, and that is happening with different governments and things, but more for, so I think, the performance aspects. But the only way that data is going to be here is that you have the infrastructure that's going to be able to serve that data. So if you think about cloud is where the majority of the data is actually residing, where the processing is happening. And so when you're using your phones and going out, you've got a cache server here, and then it goes over somewhere else. And so that means that we've got to build the infrastructure here. The only way that works is when you do it at scale, hence the things that we were talking about earlier. So do we have enough data centers? Do we have enough bandwidth? Do we have enough cloud services? And I'm talking about it across the board, right? The big players when it comes down to the cloud service providers, but also the integrators and the other clouds. Adobe, right? Locally. Everybody has some type of local service that needs to be actually deployed. But right now, they can't deploy it. There isn't a place to deploy it. That's the challenge. So hence the tsunami that's coming needs to have a break wall. That break wall is going to be data centers. And the next one's going to be the bandwidth and the interconnection across all those locations that happens. And I know you guys are representing, the basically the connectivity across the continent, right? And as it goes back out to the other parts of the world. Do we have enough of it? Are we interconnecting enough of it? Are we expanding fast enough? Do we have enough data centers? Because, by the way, no single company is going to solve this. As you said before, this is about the peering when it comes to the network, and then the collaboration when it comes down to data center capacity being built, and the tax incentives and the economic development zones or free trade zones that will spark the investments. Because right now, the way that's worked, specifically in other regions, so for example, I testified in Arizona, in Utah, across DC, right, in the US, all about sales tax abatement and other things that will incentivize companies to put money in. And every time I walked into those rooms, I said, we have billions of dollars to spend. We would like to spend it somewhere. Could you help us spend it? And that means give us the incentives, because once we start getting the opportunity to land stuff, the ripple effect is massive. So data centers don't generate a lot of jobs, local jobs, when it comes down to the front line. They're looking for thousands and thousands of jobs. But what people miss is, as soon as you land digital infrastructure, the ripple effect is big. Because second, third, fourth tertiary jobs happen. People travel. They stay at the hotels. They eat at the restaurants. They're using the transportation. Everything starts to boom when you have that foundation there. So going back to your data sovereignty aspect of it, you need the data here that's going to be able to now be served via this digital infrastructure.
No, you covered all of it. One more person.
Thank you very much for that intervention. I've been to enough of these conferences and heard these beautiful aspirations. What I'm concerned about is, in your experience, what 2 things can a group of, say, 5 people here commit to doing by the next event so that some things can start happening? I'm thinking about 5 people saying, being on a working group saying, let's talk about the infrastructure problem. There is always a bottleneck. One thing without which nothing else matters. If you can identify just that one thing, and 5 people in a working group say, we are committed to making sure that the next event, this time next year, will bring, this is what is happening. Then that really moves things forward. So what is the 1 or 2 things that you think that 5 people here can commit to take on themselves to convert this vision into some action by next year?
Sir? Indeed, I think it's a simple one for me. Start teaching. Yes, it's that simple. Create an online class to teach people simple things, from your strength, not something alien to you. If the strength of those 5 people is coding connectivity, start a class on coding connectivity. If the skills of those 5 people cut across to include DevOps, start teaching DevOps. Use the technology available to you to teach it. There's enough tools online to do so. And then invite some of us, and you will be shocked at the responses you will get. Start it, perfect it, and then aim to scale it. Don't go scaling it day one. Produce the equivalent of an MVP to pass the knowledge of those 5 people together to the next generation. And then bring in people and partners to scale that experience you're passing forward, the knowledge you're passing forward.
Let's think scale again. So I love challenging things. So yes, let's set a number because I can see the way you're thinking. Give me a goal. How do we get it done? Measure me on that goal. Correct?
Yes.
So we should get 1,000 scholarships awarded here next year.
Good.
How do we do that? Everybody here needs to figure out who we're going to go back and start targeting. Because again, we have the dollars to go back and award these scholarships. This is everything from CNET training, which is certifications in data centers, all the way back up to master's degrees. And the majority of these can be done online. So that's one. Okay? So second, to me, I think goes back to working with the government. No matter what, the thing that's going to slow down what's happening is interference when it comes down to investment choices. So, free trade zones across digital infrastructure in multiple parts of this region. I think there are small pockets of free trade zones right now. They need to be prevalent when it comes down to, if you're in digital infrastructure, we will remove the barriers to go back and get your stuff here. If we do that, billions of dollars will come. And I'm not exaggerating. Again, I've had the pleasure of driving $10 billion of infrastructure across 3 continents. And by the way, now I'm on a 4th. This is a good one. Amazing. So if we can get this, that part of it, next year, everything starts changing.
So thank you very much for that. Now, let me just answer the training challenge. I can say almost with confidence that NGNOC for the last 10 years has mastered the art of, training people. And I've got a team in this country. There is a program called the Hotels.ng engineering program. It literally is a hackathon that trains from DevOps to product designers. And lots of people, even from outside Nigeria, have taken part of this. And personally, I have trained people in almost every single country on this continent. And I've got an online program. Pick any skill in IT. I can deliver it at scale now. So the challenge I need is, Who are the organizations that need what skills? And I can put up a training program to deliver it at scale, guaranteed, even with the engineer community. Now, the second one about the government, I love that because I've seen this myself a lot, right? Because when we did this event, there was a minister here. There was a representative of the governor. There is a lot of social capital here that I feel is not being deployed appropriately. That's why I say, can we have a group of 5 people, big wigs with influence, taking upon themselves a commitment? We will go talk to the governor, Minister X, and try by next term to make sure maybe we are getting concessions from the customs guys that, when equipment is landing, it will be no more than X days in the ports. That is the kind of commitment that if we make here, I think we're going to expand the influence of this event beyond just, this talk. So thank you very much for the challenge.
Excellent. Great question. And by the way, just to put a point on this, there's a lot of influence in this room. I mean, I'm looking around a lot of the faces that own or drive the decisions inside of it. That's what we need to get back together into the government to say, this is what the economic development opportunity is. If you can put programs in place. Okay, and this pattern has repeated around the world, so it's not new. You take Ashburn, Virginia, the largest data center core concentration in the world. They are the most successful at economic development. 13 cents out of every dollar goes back to the community. Imagine that kind of thing happening here. It boosts. We keep talking about the tide lifting all boats. So a partnership, right, with the government to truly incentivize digital infrastructure will change the region, period.
We have federal presence here. Yes? Okay. We had state presence yesterday. The commissioner represented the governor, right? Okay. So let's put that challenge out. Let's get an economic development zone for digital cloud infrastructure by the time we are sitting here next year. And I would say, my dear friend, can I commit you to have a conversation with us again next year as your schedule permits?
Set the date. Yes.
So gather those 5 people who are willing to be part of it. And let's scale the infrastructure, okay? Joshua, are we done?
Yes, thank you so much.